Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer on what is, without a doubt, one of the most remarkable evolutionary success stories in the history of our planet. Today, we're tracing the incredible evolutionary journey of seed plants. Now, this isn't just your standard story about flora. We are doing a deep dive into the biological, cellular, and molecular innovations that allowed plants to completely conquer dry land and ultimately make human civilization possible. To really wrap our heads around the sheer resilience of the plant kingdom, I want to take you back to May 18, 1980. Picture this: Mount St. Helens erupts with just a devastating force. We're talking a blast 500 times stronger than the Hiroshima atomic bomb. It ripped through the landscape at over 300 miles per hour, completely wiping out hundreds of hectares of forest. It left behind nothing but this barren, desolate landscape covered in ash, completely devoid of any visible life. So how on earth does an ecosystem bounce back from a sterilizing event of that magnitude?
Well, the answer, remarkably, blew right in on the wind: fireweed seeds. Within just a few short years, plants like fireweed had entirely recolonized the blast zone. And they didn't arrive as mature plants, right? They arrived as perfectly engineered survival pods. At a cellular level, a seed contains a multicellular embryo and a vital food supply, all tightly wrapped in a tough, protective coat. It's this compact, super durable structure that allows plants to conquer even the absolute harshest environments on Earth.
Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the power of a seed. Second, surviving the terrestrial world. Third, gymnosperms, the naked seeds. Fourth, angiosperms, flowers and fruits. And finally, human survival and seed plants.
Part 1. The power of a seed. Escaping the limits of water and time.
Before seeds evolved, plants were strictly limited by water and time. But seeds provided a literal evolutionary superpower: dormancy. To put that into perspective, scientists actually analyzed a 2,000-year-old Judean date palm seed found buried under an ancient fortress. By tracking the radioactive decay of carbon-14 using the natural logarithm equation, they figured out that this specific seed still retained roughly 79% of its carbon-14 isotope. And here's the crazy part: despite 2 millennia of dormancy, that tiny embryo successfully germinated into a perfectly healthy seedling.
To fully appreciate how big of a deal this is, we have to contrast seeds with what came before them, which were spores. For the first 100 million years of plant life on land, mosses and ferns relied entirely on single-celled haploid spores that had very short lifespans. Seeds are just a massive biological upgrade. They come packed with a multicellular diploid embryo, a hardened seed coat, and a stored endosperm food supply. This gives the germinating seedling the immediate molecular energy it needs to establish its roots and shoots.
Section 2. Surviving the terrestrial world. Evolutionary technology for a drying Earth.
As the massive Carboniferous swamps began drying out, plants desperately needed new molecular and structural solutions. At a cellular level, seed plants evolved microscopic gametophytes that stayed completely hidden within the moist reproductive tissues of the parent sporophyte. This acted like a shield, protecting that sensitive haploid DNA from environmental stresses, like mutating ultraviolet radiation. We also start to see heterospory, which is the genetic division into megaspores for female gametophytes and microspores for males. And crucially, those microspores evolved into pollen, utilizing incredibly durable sporopolitan polymers to finally free plants from needing ambient water for fertilization. A total game changer.
Tracing this on a grand chronological scale, we see the very first evidence of seed plants, like the fossilized Alkinsia, showing up around 360 million years ago. Roughly 55 million years later, around the 305 million year mark, the first gymnosperms step onto the scene, perfectly adapted to that drying Permian climate. And then, quite a bit later, about 140 million years ago, we get the explosive origin of the angiosperms.
Moving right into Section 3. Gymnosperms, the naked seeds. Thriving as the Mesozoic climate dried.
As those ancient fern swamps dried up, these hardy seed plants totally conquered the Earth, dominating the Mesozoic era. Now, the word gymnosperm literally translates to naked seed. Unlike enclosed fruits, gymnosperm ovules are just exposed, right out in the open, on modified leaves called sporophylls, which usually pack densely together to form structures that we know as pine cones.
The sheer diversity within the gymnosperms is just wild. First, you have ancient cycads, which are biologically fascinating because they actually still retain ancient flagellated sperm, a direct leftover trait from their seedless ancestors. You've got ginkgos, which are super popular in cities because they are incredibly tolerant of air pollution.
There are the tough, desert-dwelling grinophytes, and, of course, the conifers. This group includes the giant sequoias, which are truly massive. I mean, a single sequoia tree can weigh as much as 24 blue whales. Section 4. Angiosperms, Flowers and Fruits. Solving Darwin's abominable mystery.
So, angiosperms are by far the most dominant and widespread plant group on Earth today, making up about 90% of all plant species. But, interestingly enough, their origin deeply frustrated Charles Darwin. He famously referred to the sudden, widespread appearance of flowering plants in the fossil record about 140 million years ago as an abominable mystery. To him, it seemed like they literally just burst onto the scene out of nowhere, rapidly replacing gymnosperms in ecosystems all over the world.
The secret to their explosive success lies in their highly specialized reproductive mechanics. It starts when a pollen grain lands on a sticky stigma, which initiates a really complex chemical dialogue. A tube cell then actually elongates, growing a pollen tube straight down the style to deliver sperm directly into the ovary. Post-fertilization, the ovule matures into a seed, and the ovary wall thickens into a fruit. Yes, building a fruit is biologically expensive, but it's a brilliant dispersal mechanism designed to basically trick animals into transporting those seeds miles away.
Now, for undergraduate biology, here is an absolutely crucial molecular innovation you need to know: double fertilization. In angiosperms, that pollen tube discharges two distinct sperm cells. One fertilizes the egg, creating your standard diploid zygote, but the other one? It fuses with two nuclei in the central cell to create a unique triploid or 3-end cell. This triploid cell then rapidly divides to form the endosperm, which is that starchy food supply. It's a genius evolutionary hack. It ensures the plant only ever expends metabolic energy building a food supply if an egg is successfully fertilized, totally preventing wasted nutrients.
This whole process plays out across the two major lineages of angiosperms, monocots and eudicots. They're primarily distinguished by their number of cotyledons, or embryonic seed leaves. Morphologically speaking, monocots, think grasses, exhibit parallel leaf veins and scattered stem vascular tissue. Eudicots, on the other hand, like oaks, feature net-like veination and vascular tissue that is neatly arranged in a concentric ring.
And that brings us to Section 5. Human survival and seed plants, why our future depends on theirs.
The reality is, human civilization is completely built upon these evolutionary innovations, yet we exist within a terrifyingly narrow agricultural bottleneck. Think about this. Just 6 angiosperm crops, maize, rice, wheat, potatoes, cassava, and sweet potatoes, yield a staggering 80% of all calories consumed by humans worldwide. These crops are the highly manipulated products of 12,000 years of artificial selection. Relying that heavily on such a tiny fraction of global plant diversity makes crop conservation an absolutely urgent matter of global food security.
Furthermore, seed plants essentially serve as humanity's greatest natural pharmacy. Today, about 25% of prescription drugs in the United States contain active ingredients derived directly from plants. For example, the pain-relieving chemicals in aspirin were originally traced right back to willow bark. And Taxol, which is a critically important ovarian cancer drug, was discovered hiding in the bark of the Pacific yew tree.
Yet, despite our utter literal dependence on these ecosystems, they are under severe threat. We are currently clearing about 15 million acres of tropical rainforest every single year. This loss of habitat doesn't just reduce how much atmospheric carbon dioxide we absorb, it completely wipes out countless plant species, potentially driving a mass extinction that could forever alter the evolutionary history of Earth.
Which brings us to a final, incredibly pressing thought. So far, fewer than 5,000 plant species have been seriously studied as potential sources of medicine. If the tropical rainforest is basically this vast, unexplored medicine chest, what molecular miracles, what potential cures hidden in the biology of seed plants are we literally burning before they're ever even discovered? It's a heavy thought, but one that I hope leaves you eager to explore plant conservation further. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.